Hey guys, so welcome back to Coal Country Homestead. So we have some progress that we made today. We put some rabbit fencing around our platform area where our brassicas were. That we either think it was the rabbits or there's a groundhog that lives in a shed underneath the shed, literally right behind these trees. And there was a big hole down behind the ducks there underneath the fence. So we have a pretty good inclination that it might have been the groundhog as well as the rabbits, but I know that groundhogs are notorious for eating brassicas, so he may very well have cleared all these out. So I'm just going to pull these up and call them a loss and then replant them with what we bought yesterday. So we probably have more than what we actually have in the ground right now, which is fine because I have 4 extra rows besides the 2 that were already planted. We did get all of our potatoes planted today. So behind the ducks, I have some potatoes. Then in one of the raised beds down there in the corner where they were last year, and the volunteers, I planted around those that we lost the onions. And then our garlic lost bed where we planted the celery, I also planted potatoes in that bed there. So all of our potatoes are planted. I did get one more bed cleared, so we only have 2.5 more beds to go, and then the garden is totally back to normal. But if she pans out and gives you a little shot over here, it kind of starting to look real nice again. So it's starting to feel good that the garden is getting back to normal. And the girls are working on the pool right now. We're emptying out the pool because it got real algified last year and we couldn't get it back to normal with all the chemicals and hundreds of dollars in chemicals. So we opted for totally emptying it out, scrubbing it down, and then refilling it. So things are going good. We're all excited for the yard looking nice and the garden looking nice. And hopefully this fence keeps this groundhog or rabbits out and we won't lose anything else in here. So good. All right, guys. So another thing I want to mention is the prices of plants at the big box stores is getting absolutely ridiculous. Last year we thought it was bad. This year they're like literally $6 per plant. And sometimes at the big box stores you can get lucky and you might find one with like, 2 or 3 or even more. I think like this one here, there wasn't any yellow squash at the farmer's market where we picked these 2 trays up. So this is the only one we bought at the big box store. So if you do buy at the big box store, you want to try to find the ones that have multiple plants per pot. That way you're getting a little bit better of a deal. But we literally paid $20 per flat at our local farmer's market. So we got over 300 plants for roughly $100. So it was like 300 to 400 plants. So it ended up being about 25 cents, 30 cents a plant. So you can't beat that. I mean, that's almost as good as, starting your seeds on your own. So keep that in mind if you have trouble starting seeds or if something like this happens to you guys or the frost, which happened to a lot of people this year, I know. And it's just been a rough couple of years for gardening. So look at your local farmer's market and see if you can find a deal like this, and that'll save you a lot of money. All right, so let's get to it. All right, guys, so we finished planting all of our brassica trays that we had. So as you can see, everything looks nice again, nice and leafy. Hopefully it stays this way. I'm gonna make sure I shore up a couple spots here on the fence with some zip ties and some stakes before we go to bed tonight so that nothing can get in, and hopefully this will work at keeping the pests out. And then we also planted more peas along the fence here. So we had another container of peas, and then we had 3 containers of Romano Italian long beans. And then we had that 1 cup of yellow squash. I separated the 3 plants, so hopefully that won't shock the roots too much. I could have separated these green zucchinis, but I was afraid that they were gonna have too much of a shock ripping apart the tender roots. So hopefully I can grow 2 of them together right next to each other. I'm gonna try the vertical method with the zucchinis this year. So I'm gonna have a stake and then wrap them up the stake or use the fence or something. And then to our surprise, while I was coming down here planting the zucchini, I noticed that these 3 butternut squash that got killed by the frost, they came back. And then while I noticed that, I went down and checked these acorns squash that were down here, and I planted a tomato right on top of one, but as you can see, it came back. So I'll have a acorn squash coming out of that tomato there. But that's always a nice surprise when things are resilient and make it back. So what we have left to do here is prep these 2 beds here on the end and along the ducts. If you want to come over here, Sam, I'll show them where I decided to plant some potatoes. So back here was kind of my earlier compost area where I used to dump my compost and stuff. So some of the soil actually turned into really good soil back here. So I also have these 2 bags of compost to add to the top of it if I need to. But this also turned out to be our wild patch of berries. So 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it was just like one little berry plant coming out over the fence there. I think it might have produced a few berries. And then as you can see, it just kind of exploded and the berries went everywhere. I mean, they're all over the yard now. But if you take a look here, I mean, there's dozens of berries on this plant. So this is like a 3 or 4 year old plant now. And then over here, there's a bunch on this one. So I'm excited about those. I got all kinds of berries popping up everywhere. So I'm kind of gonna let this grow into like, you know, a berry patch. But I planted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 rows of potatoes. We have golden russets, red Lesota. We have store-bought that started having eyes on them. So we planted those. We have caribou russet. We have Norland. And if you guys come down here, I'll show you what I decided to do with our loss of onions in this bed. I see the little baby duckies. Hey, mama duck. She came at me earlier because I was holding one of them. She jumped at me.
She said, not today.
She's a good mama.
She's a good mama.
But the duckies are sweet. They actually went up the ramp into the house too. But over here, this was our a potato bed last year, and like I showed you before, these are volunteer potatoes that came off of potato berries, and then this was full of onions. And while we were on vacation, most of them, you know, 90% of this bed died. So I decided to make this a potato bed. And I waited a little bit too long to plant my potatoes. The sprouts were like, you know, some of them were like a foot long and, you know, 6 inches long. So that gets a little more difficult when they're like that, because then you wanna bury most of the sprout, but when it's real long, you wanna try to keep just the tip of it out. So you gotta kind of bury them a little deeper or sideways or something. So it worked out though. Most of them were okay. So we planted potatoes in that bed, and then our failed garlic bed that I made a video on. This was early season garlic, spring garlic they called it, and it was supposed to be able to work out if you plant it in early spring, but normally the temperatures are still supposed to be lower. We had a really warm late winter, so I mean, we didn't even have, you know, 30-degree weather. I mean, it was mostly 40s or 50s all late winter. So I don't think any of the garlic got cold stratified. So only like 4 or 5 of them came up, and none of them were doing really good. So there's a couple in here. There might be 3 or 4 left in here, so I'm not really worried about it. So I planted the potatoes around them. And
might have 1 dinner's worth of garlic.
yeah, I mean, if we don't get any, it's okay. It was more of an experiment and just to try it out. But like I said, I think it would have worked if the temperatures were lower, but it just was a warm winter. So here we have Yukon Gold and Superior potatoes, and garlic and celery is a good companion plant for potatoes, so that worked out real well. And got some weeds here. You want to try to keep your onion beds weed free as possible. I got a little weeding to do in here, and that one came up with a bunch of weeds. But this weed right here, if you have chickens, this is called fat hen, or I think it's lamb's ear or sheep's ear or something. But its nickname is fat hen, and the chickens just absolutely love it. So they gobble this up when I put it in there. But yeah, they just love the fat hen. They call it fat hen for a reason, because they just tear these leaves up. But yeah, they ate most of their peas and Brussels sprouts that we put in there today. And our grape is doing good down here. I don't know if we showed them the little cluster of grapes on here.
Little baby grape.
I'm excited for those. Hopefully this will produce more than one cluster this year. Last year it had one nice cluster. And then I would like to get some plants inside the chicken coop. And like I said before, I want to put my metal roof on the chicken coop to keep the ground in there dry. When the ground's dry in the run, then the eggs are usually cleaner, like by a lot. And then when it rains, they track the mud into the nesting boxes, and then that's when you get your yucky eggs. So it's a lot easier to keep the eggs clean if you have a covered chicken coop. But I do want to have some plants in here eventually. I tried a Japanese maple in there before and it died. But I've heard like butterfly bushes and a few other plants do really well in there, especially if you cover them up with some fence and let them get established first. But I'd like to have them have their own little garden in there, and hopefully some grapes will be growing in there and some hops will be growing in there eventually. So I like them to be able to pick at things that are growing in their own run. But for right now, it's doing all right. But yeah, guys, I'm really happy with the progress we've been making. I mean, it looks 10 times better. I mean, it looks so much better. It was so overwhelming when it's all weedy like that in the beginning when I didn't have any of the beds prepped. It's like overwhelming. I know a lot of people deal with that, and trust me, I feel for you. But sometimes you just gotta do the best you can and just get it in the ground and take your time and don't really stress about it. I mean, that's the only thing I can say is that, it's just the way it is. Sometimes gardens aren't perfect, so this is a real garden, real life, so I like the way it's looking. So I think that's it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this video, and be sure to subscribe and like the video, and we'll catch you on the next one. See ya.